So I invite on the stage Nicholas Boy-Smith, and who is the founder and the chairman of Create Streets. So he was also chair of the advisory board of the government office for place as an academician of the Academy of Urbanism. Thank you very much. And Boy-Smith, 10 minutes. Thank you.
Grazie Matteo e Giada. Grazie. Signore e signori, mi scusi se parlo in inglese. Il mio italiano è pessimo. Pessimo, pessimo.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, I'm going to speak English today because my Italian is rather poor. I'd love to speak your language, but I can't.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, back to English, which I'm a little better in now. Carlos Moreno has shown us that cities must be organised around time and proximity. And I want to suggest to you all today in this beautiful room something important and complementary. That proximity only works if places within those 15 or 20 or 30 minutes are places which people love. My first point is that the missing link in much of the conversation is about beauty as infrastructure. And this room in this city seems a good place to say that. We talk about cities as ecosystems, but we sometimes forget that human preference is part of that ecosystem. If you create places that people like, then they are more likely to support intensification. This is from a visual preference survey that Create Streets did. I should say that Create Streets, we're quite unique in that we're both a think tank, a specialist urban think tank, but we do real work. We work for designers and with designers, we do design, we work for landowners, mainly in the UK, but also in America, in the Bahamas, in the Middle East, and France and Finland. This is a visual preference survey we did, where nearly 80% of people preferred the intensification that makes proximity possible. Because it looked nice, because they warmed to it. The council actually wanted to object to this, and the politics changed, and the local politicians could see that every single segment of society, left wing, right wing, rich, poor, old, young, preferred the intensification. So despite the fact that the officials, I'm afraid, were opposed to it, the politicians supported it. So creating places that people like is not just something that can support intensification, it can actually pull us together as a society, and that is, heaven knows, something that we need. Place and beauty is something that most of us can agree upon. And there are multiple examples we found here. This is from an urban design, or a design that we did in Devon, in rural England, where we were able to double the density from the houses on the left to the village green on the right, by creating it in a visual aesthetic that matched what people liked in Devon. This is from another scheme we were working on in Lichfield, in the Midlands, in the middle of England, whereby asking people with our online tool, what's your favourite building? What's your favourite place? Where do you like to walk? Where do you not like to walk? Where would you take your child? Where would you go with your parents? We were able to get strong public support for the growth of the town centre. Lichfield is a historic city, not quite as old as Rome, but it's very old. The town centre is small. Well, now it's growing because we've unlocked support for intensification using public preferences. And it's also worth adding, if I might, that it's incredibly easy to predict what people will like. This is from a paper I co-wrote with a mathematician, Nikos Salangaros, last year, where we used large language models to back-test a series of visual preference surveys that we had run in the UK. The large language models predicted with near 100% accuracy what it was that people would like. Because we see, and we're seeing this now from the work on neuroscience that people like Cleo Valentine and Colin Ellam are doing, we see the patterns that consistently people prefer. Variety in a pattern, coherent complexity, a little bit of colours, a little bit of symmetry. People aren't saying, they're really not saying that new buildings must look exactly like the past, but they are asking for buildings that rhyme with the past and which have some sense of place, that are somewhere, not anywhere. And creating places that people like, creating buildings that people like, is also to be deeply, deeply green. As I'm sure you all know, the carbon consequence of a building is typically up to about half a function of building it, not of heating or cooling it. So if we can make a building that people love, then when its first use ends, as it will end one day, we will find new uses for it, and its carbon consequence will collapse during the centuries as we repurpose it time after time after time. This is a tithe barn that was built in the 12th century near where I live in the English countryside, which now acts as an art gallery. I think we can guarantee that the monks, in fact the nuns who had it built in the 12th century, could not have conceived that this building, 800 years, 700 years later, would be an art gallery, and yet here we are. Creating places that people like also encourages pro-social behaviour. Functional proximity is not the same as emotional proximity. This is from a study that Charles Montgomery did in America, where students pretended to be lost tourists in front of these two buildings. 5 times as many random passers-by spontaneously stopped to help the spuriously lost tourists in front of one of the buildings, and you can guess which one, versus the other. Now, I happen to know, because Charles Montgomery told me, that one of the students standing in front of one of these buildings ultimately married the member of the public who'd stopped to help her get the way to a local metro station, which breaks all rules of social science and should invalidate the whole experiment, but I don't think we'll let it stop us today. My second point, ladies and gentlemen, if my first point is the missing link of beauty as infrastructure, my second point is that gentle density is sustainable and livable density. The most sustainable city is not the tallest or the newest, but the most efficiently inhabited. And by gentle density, I mean terraces, mansion blocks, perimeter blocks, and we know that they increase livability, walkability, and reduce crime. This is one of the very first urban designs that Create Streets did, now over a decade ago, which I'm sad to say was never built. So other ones now are being. We can see from the patterns in this urban form, those blocks with clear backs and fronts, they're associated in good British and Australian data with lower crime. That multiplicity of ways of getting from any A, crikey, what have I just done? From any A to any B is associated with people having more propensity to walk or to cycle and less need to jump into a car. So the form matters. What's this doing to me? Okay. The form matters as well. Medium rise is also more efficient to heat and cool and can be built with lower embodied carbon than high rise. Energy usage per metre cubed increases when buildings go beyond a certain point. So Carlos has shown the importance of time efficiency and compactness, but form determines the compactness, how the compactness works. It's no longer a question of towers versus sprawl, but of forms and patterns. My third point, and it sounds like I need to hurry up here, is that streets are the primary urban ecosystem. If you want a living city, ladies and gentlemen, start with the street, not the building. Streets are a perfect example of convergent evolution. We see them in every single isolated and separate urban history anywhere around the world that I've picked up to there. And what we're finding is increasingly that streets hang around, and that when they're gone, people actually are starting to want to put back again. This is actually from an urban design we're working on right now in the Middle East, though obviously delayed at the moment, where we're putting back the streets that were lost in the 1970s. Remarkably like we lost streets in France or in Britain or in America. Streets are Carlos spoke about reducing travel distance. Streets can be the place where proximity actually happens. This is from that same city. This is the shopping centre that was built 50 years ago on the left. This photo was taken about 10 minutes afterwards in the last remaining bit of historic street pattern, and you can see what is happening. Around the world, people vote with their feet in where they want to be. And I've got 1 minute, so I better stop. So I'll jump over that. And all I say is this, that what makes streets work, we can code for. We can stick it into the DNA of places, and this is what we're doing increasingly around the country. So we're now writing in the UK codes of streets left and right, north and south. And my final point, and I will now be hurried up, the economic case is that beauty and nature pay. This is not just being nice. This is from a study that I did almost a decade ago into every single property transaction in London and in 5 other cities. And the evidence consistently showed that places with higher and older urban morphology, with high modal land values, were associated with high land values, higher occupancy occupancy and lower vacancies. And so is greenery. Greenery is associated not just with higher value, it's also associated with better health and with less depression, higher cognitive development, reduced mortality, reduced crime and a high house price. And what my economists did in this study, Greening Up in London, I'll say if you wanted a photo, you had to know how to hurry, was to actually manage to put a number on that, to turn around to councils and say, this is not just about being nice, this is creating value for people, for societies and for places. That's all. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, and excuse me for
I'm very
impressed.
cross, but there we
Okay,
go.
anyway, so I invite to our last and